conversations about our next action plan. I want to thank every victim survivor, every frontline worker, every concerned Australian who has contributed to this process. This suspension motion deals with a number of topics, and I can't do justice to each of them in the short amount of time I have. So let me focus on just a few. The member has called for a Royal Commission, and I understand that this call comes from a very good place. It comes from the concerns that people have, the desire to see an end to family, domestic and sexual violence in this country. But, Mr Speaker, we don't need another report. As the members themselves have said, last year's Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commissioner's annual report to Parliament pointed out that we have 1,000 recommendations already from a variety of reports across 8 royal commissions, 8 major reports like royal commissions, inquiries and reviews to guide us. And Mr Speaker, I wanted to show the chamber these are the recommendations. We don't need another royal commission. These are the recommendations of those reports alone. The South Australian Royal Commission took 17 months from its beginning to its end. I don't want to spend another 17 months examining the same issue that we've examined in 8 major reports recently. We need to get on and act, and that's what frontline workers, domestic violence survivors and experts have told us. Every family violence peak body in the country released a statement that says, and I quote, "Royal Commissions have an important role in the Australian system, including gathering evidence when we have no other way to get to the root of a problem. That is not the situation here. The evidence is clear. We know what needs to be done to prevent, respond to and help people heal from family violence. Ending this crisis requires action, and that's what I'm determined to do. It requires conversations at home and in our community, in workplaces. It requires legislative change. It requires our collective efforts at every level. And as a government, our investment has been heavily focused, and rightly so, on response and recovery for women victim survivors. About 80% of our $4.4 billion investment goes to response. So far, we've funded 1,400 organisations to help about 500,000 people, including through things like making the leaving violence payment permanent, an extra $500 million to fund 500 new frontline workers, and $1.2 billion invested in crisis housing so that women and children can safely leave domestic violence. But I have to say, Mr Speaker, this investment in frontline services will never decline until we deal with the root of the problem, and that is stopping the violence before it happens. And I'd also say, Mr Speaker, that when we see state governments and territory governments actually cut their investment in the face of this violence, it's incredibly disappointing. Unbelievably, Queensland, where we've seen this most recent tragic death, has cut $40 million from domestic and family violence services and hidden a report that made 350 important recommendations. And in this morning's Courier Mail, we read that domestic violence services that have criticised these cuts have been threatened with further funding cuts and hauled into the Minister's office. The same case has occurred in the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory has shocking rates of family, domestic and sexual violence, shocking rates, and we've seen horrific murders there recently. They have cut their funding by 11%, more than a tenth of their budget they have cut in recent times. The dollars matter. The dollars matter, and we will continue to invest, and we expect states that are responsible for delivering important frontline services, we expect them to continue to invest as well. But as the member for Wentworth said, we are fighting a losing battle unless we directly address the online misogyny that is driving so much of this behaviour. And we've seen a couple of recent reports that are very disturbing, as the motion refers to, but I would say this. Organisations like schools, like sporting clubs, provide the real-world role models and heroes that our young men look up to. When they're being fed a diet of violent pornography before they've had their first kiss, it is no surprise that we are seeing rates of sexual assault exploding amongst under 18s. The best antidote to that is the work that we're doing as a government to limit the exposure of young people to violent misogyny online. But real-world role models have the power to change this, and they come through our families sitting at the dining table, they come through our sporting clubs, and of course they come through our schools as well. Mr Speaker, the issue of family, domestic and sexual violence will soon return to the National Cabinet. The Prime Minister has said that he wants to go back to the National Cabinet with issues around family, domestic and sexual violence, because we are absolutely, as a Commonwealth Government, prepared to play a leadership role, to invest, to drive change, to make legislative reform, but we need the partnership of the states and territories as well, Mr Speaker. So far, in recent times, as I say, we've invested more than any other government. We've made the leaving violence payment permanent. We've launched the first ever standalone plan for family, domestic and sexual violence for First Nations women, backed by an additional $218 million investment. We've boosted funding for that 500 workers program by more than 70%. We've boosted funding for 1800 RESPECT by 40%. We've invested $183 million to make the child support system safer. We've legislated to make sure our social security system can't be weaponised by perpetrators of abuse. We've funded programs that intervene earlier with men who want to change their behaviours. We've invested in emergency and transitional accommodation. That $1.2 billion is absolutely life-changing. It's a safety lifeline for women escaping domestic violence. We've invested a record $3.9 billion in legal services, with an extra $800 million specifically for family violence legal services. We're reforming the family law system so that it's safer, simpler and more accessible. We're reforming the child support system so children get the support they need. We're supporting the recovery of children who've experienced violence, including with an $81 million investment specifically for child-specific counselling. We've invested $82 million to deliver innovative approaches to better identify high-risk perpetrators and share information about them across state and territory boundaries. We've legislated 10 days paid domestic violence leave. We've made it illegal to fire someone because of their experience of family domestic violence. We've launched an inquiry into domestic, family and sexual violence related suicide, and, Mr Speaker, so much more.
The question is the motion be agreed to, and give the call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Speaker. I first of all would like to thank my colleague, the member for Warringah, for bringing forward this incredibly important suspension motion. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Minister and the Government for all the efforts that they've done to date to address this really important issue. We know that you are genuinely addressing this issue, and we do thank you for that. But we also heard that the rates of sexual assault are exploding, particularly for under 18-year-olds, and it is extremely alarming. I think the finish line is moving ahead of us the whole time. Everything we do is not enough. We are not getting there. We need to change our tact, and we need to be looking a whole lot more at prevention. I was at the Northern Beaches Police Awards the other week, and I spoke to the Acting Assistant Commissioner, and what she told me was really alarming. 80% of the work that they do is related to domestic violence. 80% of their call-outs are related to domestic violence. That is absolutely stunning. It floored me completely. That is what they are focusing on. Whatever we are doing is not enough. And so this is a crisis, and we do need to keep looking at this. I know we've got a lot of reports, we've got a lot of information, but whatever we're doing is not working. I also just want to call out Pauline Hanson's comments from the other week, where she illustrated, quite frankly, a stunning level of ignorance. She told women who are getting abused by men just to not put up with it. It ignores so much. So many times when you try and leave a relationship that is violent, that is what triggers the violence. We know about Hannah Clark. She's the example. She was separated from her husband. She had left. She was living somewhere separately with her 3 children. She had a domestic violence order, and yet she and her children were still killed. It is not simply not putting up with it. There is, and we still know, there's a severe lack of crisis accommodation and frontline services. On the Northern Beaches, for example, we have only 10 government-funded crisis rooms available for women and children escaping domestic violence. And Women and Children First, they're one of the shelters on the Northern Beaches. They turn away over 10 women and their families every single week. And that organisation is hugely funded by philanthropy, and so we need greater investment in these crisis accommodation and these support networks. We also know that children who are victims of domestic violence, they are victims in their own right. There's very little funding that goes into supporting them as well, and that's something that keeps coming up. Social housing wait lists. On the Northern Beaches, the wait list has risen to over 850 cases, and typical waits for a 3-bedroom home exceeds 10 years. And I do thank the government again for the work that they're doing on social housing. Legal aid, tens of thousands...
Order. The time for debate has expired. The question is the motion be agreed to. I'll put the question. Those opinions say aye. Against no. I think the noes have it. Call the clerk.
Government business, notice number 1, proposed Joint Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence.
Call to the Leader of the House.
Speaker, I move the motion relating to the appointment of a Joint Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
The question is the motion be agreed to. Give a call to the member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Artificial intelligence poses multiple challenges to Australia and our people. We see moral challenges, strategic challenges and economic challenges. AI is reshaping the world and the geopolitical implications for Australia are clear. Right now we are witnessing a race for AI dominance between the United States and the People's Republic of China. And we have to find a way to adapt in this new era of geopolitical competition in a way that upholds our sovereignty, security and economic competitiveness. We can't get left behind in this race, as AI will drive changes in the geopolitical order and the world economy. And we can't pretend that the AI revolution won't impact us. It will, it already is, and we need to respond to the risks and the opportunities. That's why it's vital that this Parliament explores the opportunities and risks posed by AI and prepares our nation for the challenges that lie ahead. That's why the Coalition will support the establishment of a Joint Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence. This was the Opposition's initiative, along with the member for Curtin, and we are pleased that the government has agreed to work with us on this important matter. A committee of this nature will give the Parliament the platform to lead the Australian people in understanding the risks, the opportunities and the necessary actions required for Australians to thrive in this new era of technology. We will explore how AI impacts our resilience, our productivity, our economic competitiveness and our living standards. We will understand the impact of AI on our national security, our political system and our way of life. We will engage in moral questions, economic questions and strategic questions. And the committee will examine the adequacy of existing laws, the importance of data sovereignty and the impact of AI on local communities. Addressing these matters is an essential task for our Parliament. Without doing so, Australia risks falling behind other nations already ahead in the AI race. We need to ask the hard questions now and develop a national response in the committee. And that is our role in the Commonwealth Parliament. And this committee will allow us to deliberate on these important questions along with the Australian public. Policymakers have a moral obligation to hammer out a new political and economic settlement that ensures that AI serves all Australians, not just a few. Our workers, our businesses, our industry, our kids all need to be considered in the course of this committee's work. We can't let big tech reshape our nation without democratic oversight and accountability. And that's our job, and we look forward to hearing from people across Australia during public hearings and through their submissions. At the same time, we must build a sovereign AI capability or accept that Australia's future will be shaped by other nations. Our national security and economic future must be front and centre, and I want to make 3 quick points. First, Australia should play to our strengths in this AI race. Australia has an abundance of land, energy, critical minerals, we have a stable government and plenty of homegrown talent. We have a real opportunity to become the AI compute hub of the Southern Hemisphere. And this is why the energy debate is central to our AI future. AI is energy intensive. A ChatGPT search is 10 times more energy intensive than a Google search. And AI hyperscalers are looking for reliable sources of energy, and Australia has a natural abundance of coal, gas and uranium. We need to create the right conditions for companies to invest here and partner with Australians to build a sovereign AI capability. That's why getting cheaper, reliable baseload power online is so important. Renewables are insufficient and we must face this hard truth. That's why energy security must take precedence over climate ideology in this debate. Getting the incentives and tax settings right will also be important, as will the governance framework. But this is what we must do to build sovereign AI here at home. This committee will go far in identifying these opportunities. Second, we must understand the security risks of falling behind in the AI race. AI has many military applications, as we are seeing in the wars in Ukraine and Iran. It also can be used to attack a nation's critical infrastructure, government and businesses. And without sovereign AI capability, we will be entirely dependent on other nations for our security. And as we saw recently with the US government's decision to hit the kill switch on Anthropic's Mythos model, if we don't have sovereign AI capability, we are vulnerable to all sorts of strategic and economic shocks, even coercion by a foreign power. And right now, Australia is tethered to the United States' AI capability by submarine cables. And that's a risk that we can't keep running. That's why we must build our own sovereign AI capability here on our red dirt with Australian tech and talent. Finally, our education system needs to get ready for the AI revolution. If we want our kids to be ready for AI, we must fix our education system and get back to basics. And NAPLAN and PISA scores need to lift, and they've been dropping over the last 2 decades consistently. Maths, science, literature, history, writing by hand, time and thought, because innovation is driven by people, not machines, and we want our kids to be able to build AI models, not be slaves to them. So we need to invest in the next generation of young Australians who can think clearly, act justly and lead wisely, and there is a lot of work to be done in the education space. So this committee has a big task ahead of it. It won't be a comprehensive report with all the answers when it concludes its work later this year, but it's time that we started the national conversation, and this is a good first step. And I am confident that Australia can thrive in this new world of AI. This committee is a step towards doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call the member for Casey.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I commend and echo all of the statement from the member for Canning. I won't repeat that. I want to acknowledge the government. This is a bipartisan committee, and it's important when it comes to artificial intelligence that we can agree as much as possible. I do want to acknowledge also the member for Curtin, who I know has been engaged in these conversations and has been an advocate for a committee like this as well. So it's important we acknowledge that when it comes to this committee, all parts of the parliament are wanting to work together, because the reality is AI touches every aspect of our life today. It's been involved in our lives for decades, while the conversation kicked off about 4 years ago with the release of ChatGPT. AI has been impacting our lives for decades, but the profound impact of the speed of change means that these conversations have become more urgent and more important. And we want to see AI that delivers for our country to increase our standard of living, but this can't be done without a plan to also protect our way of life. Motherhood statements might make headlines, but it's the detail that matters when it comes to AI. And we have to ensure that the decisions we make always put the Australian people at the heart of those decisions, ensuring AI works for our country, for our communities, for our businesses and for individuals. And the committee will explore the detail when it comes to AI. The Joint Select Committee on AI will explore the vast opportunities for Australia to grow our economy and improve the standard of living for all Australians. It will explore the opportunities for our suburbs and our regions, for those in the city. It will look at how it can be used to drive R&D and innovation in our nation, to drive economic growth, to drive productivity, to improve the lives of all Australians. And it will look at how we can use AI to put Australians first and protect our national interest. And while AI has enormous potential to improve our lives and livelihoods, we cannot and we are not complacent to the risks. And it is why this committee will also examine the workforce and skills implications of AI, job displacement, but also job creation, the adequacy of Australia's education system, and the risks and harms arising from AI, particularly to the safety and well-being of children and vulnerable Australians. And there is a very important conversation that needs to take place in this House and across the nation about AI when it comes to democracy and also the Parliament. I know the Speaker has been a long-time advocate for civics in schools and visiting many schools, including in my community. I know he personally is thinking about the impacts of AI for our committee system, for our parliamentary system, for our officers and for democracy, and that's important work that we need to do because we have seen the opportunities to create AI memes, etc., really changes the conversation in our world. It's an important part that we need to look at. And during these uncertain times, the committee will also examine the cybersecurity and foreign interference risks of AI for our democracy, but also in everyday life. And we need to acknowledge that just like our adversaries can utilise AI against us, we can also harness AI to strengthen our national security, to protect our way of life. Now, Australia is at a pivotal moment as a country. The world is at a pivotal moment. And it is incumbent on us as members of Parliament to acknowledge the point in history that we are facing, the opportunities that we face and the challenges that we face. And we cannot shy away from those opportunities and challenges. And we need to acknowledge that when it comes to AI, the speed of change is exponential. It is getting quicker every day. And that is why this is deliberately a short, sharp committee to look at the challenges we face today, while acknowledging that once we report in November, come December and January, new challenges will emerge. So we need to be agile and move as quick as possible to ensure that we are putting the rules in place to protect Australians, make sure AI works for all of us and can solve many of the significant challenges that we face as a nation.
Thank you. And I call the member for Curtin.
Deputy Speaker, I firstly would like to thank the member for Canning and Casey and people in the government and indeed across the parliament for the constructive engagement on the establishment of this committee. I think what we see here is that the issue of AI is bigger than our ideological differences. It has a huge impact for our economy and our society. And so it makes sense that we should have some parliamentary oversight to shepherd how this progresses. There is so much uncertainty with how AI will actually change our economy and our society, and it is very fast moving. So one of the things that we are going to need to do is make sure that we have institutions and structures that can react to the speed of change in AI. And I think this select committee is a good first step in identifying the productivity opportunities, the important role that Australia could play in this and making sure that we protect our sovereignty. As well as getting the structures right and making the most of the opportunities, we need to ensure that the benefits of AI are shared broadly. And I think that will be an important part of this discussion, and make sure we have the guardrails up for both existing harms and emerging harms so that we can make the most of those opportunities. So I look forward to seeing this committee playing a really important role in navigating the uncertainty and also excitement ahead as we see our AI continues to change the world that we live in. And I commend the government for proposing this Joint Select Committee.
Thank you. All right, well, I'll put the question that the motion relating to the appointment of a Joint Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I believe the ayes have it, and I call the clerk.
Government business. Notice number 2, Criminal Code Amendment, National Sport Integrity Offences Bill 2026.
I call the Minister.
I present the Criminal Code Amendment, National Sport Integrity Offences Bill 2026 and the explanatory memorandum.
Call the clerk.
First reading, a bill for an Act to amend the Criminal Code Act 1995 and for related purposes.
I call the Minister.
I move that this bill be now read a second time. The Criminal Code Amendment, National Sport Integrity Offences Bill 2026 represents a vital step in protecting athletes, officials and fans across all sporting codes by keeping criminal elements out of Australian sport. Sport is woven into the fabric of Australian life. From the grassroots to the professional level, sport builds community, teaches resilience and unites us across generations and cultures. Over 14 million Australians participate in sport-related activities annually, helping to generate approximately 3% of our national GDP. Sport in Australia provides $83 billion in combined economic, health and educational benefits each year and makes a vital contribution towards our national identity. Competition manipulation, or match fixing as it's most commonly known, is not a victimless crime. It undermines the credibility of sporting competitions, defrauds the public, and exposes athletes to coercion and exploitation. It can also provide a foothold for transnational crime syndicates to launder money, manipulate outcomes, and target vulnerable participants in our domestic sporting codes. In recognition of these threats to the integrity of the sports sector, the review of Australia's sports integrity arrangements conducted by the Honourable James Wood AO-QC in 2017 recommended that Australia become a party to the Convention on the Manipulation of Sports Competitions, the Macklin Convention, supporting an effective global response to international sport integrity matters. The Wood Review also recommended that the Australian Government establish national match-fixing offences. In line with these recommendations, the bill introduces a comprehensive suite of reforms that will protect Australian sport. Firstly, the bill prohibits engaging in conduct that would or would be likely to affect the outcome of a sporting event with the intention of obtaining a benefit for or avoiding or causing detriment that would not otherwise be due because of participation in the sporting event. Secondly, the bill prohibits providing a benefit to another person that would tend to influence them to engage in conduct that corrupts a sporting event. Thirdly, the bill prohibits asking for, receiving or obtaining or agreeing to receive or obtain a benefit that would tend to influence a person to engage in conduct that corrupts a sporting event. Fourthly, the bill prohibits altering, destroying or concealing information about the corruption of a sporting event where doing so would facilitate, conceal or disguise the obtaining of a benefit. Fifthly, the bill prohibits the improper use or communication of information about conduct that corrupts a sporting event. Sixthly, the bill prohibits the possession of information about conduct that corrupts a sporting event where that possession is for the purposes of improperly using or communicating that information. Finally, the bill prohibits the improper use or communication of inside information. This bill imposes significant penalties for these offences, including penalties of up to 10 years imprisonment for individuals who engage in conduct that corrupts a sporting event. The penalties reflect the gravity of the harm that can arise from match-fixing conduct. Where sporting outcomes are manipulated, the resulting harm extends beyond the participants, potentially affecting spectators, sponsors, sporting organisations and the broader community. The implementation of these offences will mean Australia is compliant with the Macklin Convention, a multilateral treaty with the key objective of preventing, detecting and sanctioning the manipulation of sports competitions. Compliance with the Macklin Convention ensures Australia is connected to our international counterparts to better combat offshore networks attempting to corrupt our sports competitions. Australia is privileged to host a variety of international sporting events in the lead-up to the 2032 Brisbane Olympic and Paralympic Games. To maintain our reputation as a sport-loving nation, it is essential that Australia has effective laws that ensure the integrity of sport. A fair, safe and strong sports sector free from corruption is vital to the safety and credibility of sports and their participants, and to Australia's participation in the international sporting arena. We owe it to our athletes, our fans and our future generations to ensure that the sports they play and watch are fair and decided on merit, not manipulation. I commend the bill to the Chamber.
Thank you. The debate must now be adjourned, and the question is that the resumption of the debate be made in order for the date. Oh, you want to? No. Sorry, you want to move?
We'll move the debate be adjourned.
Okay. The question is that the resumption of the debate be made in order for the day of the next sitting. All that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I believe the ayes have it, and I call the clerk.
Government business, notice number 3. Carbon Credits and Other Legislation Amendment, Integrity and Transparency Bill 2026.
I call the Minister.
Deputy Speaker, I present the Carbon Credits and Other Legislation Amendment, Integrity and Transparency Bill 2026 and the explanatory memorandum.
I call the clerk.
First reading, a bill for an act to amend legislation relating to the achievement of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets and for related purposes.
The Minister has the call.
I move that this bill be now read a second time. Deputy Speaker, the Carbon Credits and Other Legislation Amendment, Integrity and Transparency Bill 2026 amends the Carbon Credits Carbon Farming Initiative Act 2011, the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Act 2007 and the New Vehicle Efficiency Standard Act 2024 to strengthen the integrity, transparency and effectiveness of these schemes, including by implementing key recommendations from several independent reviews. This bill marks a significant step in the continuous improvement of the Australian Carbon Credit Unit scheme. We've heard from landholders, from industry and from the full range of carbon market participants just how important the timely delivery of these reforms is to their communities and businesses and to our nation's progress towards a more diverse and sustainable economy. The Australian Carbon Credit Unit, or ACCU scheme, is a world-leading carbon crediting scheme, and it plays a critical role in supporting Australia's pathway to net zero emissions by 2050, while also manifesting a remarkable set of broader benefits. The scheme underpins a multi-billion-dollar market that generates new abatement and supports a cost-effective economy-wide transition to net zero. It incentivises new emissions reduction activities across the economy by rewarding landholders, including farmers and First Nations communities, as well as other organisations and businesses, for undertaking projects that avoid emissions or remove and store carbon from the atmosphere and store it permanently. Participating in the ACCU scheme projects can provide game-changing benefits to our regional communities by diversifying income streams, creating jobs and improving productivity in farming and natural resource industries. Land-based projects are also restoring our precious native ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, building climate resilience and supporting First Nations people to care for country, as they have done for tens of thousands of years. It is crucial that the scheme provides flexible ways to help hard-to-abate industries decarbonise, with the ability for safeguard mechanism facilities to meet their compliance obligations at a viable cost, while effective on-site abatement technologies are developed and implemented. And this flexibility supports the competitiveness of our local heavy industries, which provide Australia with sovereign capacity in an uncertain global environment, giving them the certainty required to make long-term investments to reduce on-site emissions over time. The 2022 independent review of the ACCU scheme by Professor Ian Chubb and statutory reviews by the Climate Change Authority found the scheme was sound and delivering genuine emission reductions. But they also made it clear that maintaining trust in the scheme depended on strong governance, rigorous integrity settings and continuous improvement over time. Informed by the recommendations of these reviews, the government has committed over $75 million since 2023 to deliver scheme reforms. This bill is a central pillar of that reform commitment. It will reinforce confidence in the integrity of the scheme. It builds on a scheme that is already well designed and effectively administered, ensuring it remains fit for purpose and keeps pace with a dynamic and growing carbon market. It does so through a comprehensive package of reforms to strengthen integrity, improve transparency, increase fairness and streamline administration. Deputy Speaker, we consulted on these reforms in 2023 and on this bill in 2026, and we know they are critical to support the effort of scheme participants and for maintaining the stability of the carbon market. Having worked cooperatively and concertedly with carbon market stakeholders and participants these last 2 years, I'm proud to present this package today. At its heart, this bill makes a key improvement to recognition of the rights and interests of First Nations people in the ACCU scheme. Rather than seeking consent for projects on land that is recognised or claimed as native title after these projects have already been registered, this bill requires consent to be sought up front and in a sensibly structured way, improving the scheme's alignment with the principles of free, prior and informed consent while continuing a focus on streamlined administration. This is a pragmatic approach which ensures native title holders are aware of projects before they are implemented. Partnerships can then be established to allow project planning to commence, while the final arrangements for consent with respect to exactly how the project will be implemented are worked out. The bill also takes the important step of recognising registered native title claimants as eligible interest holders, further strengthening consent requirements for ACCU projects on native title land. Deputy Speaker, the bill's second key shift is the establishment of the Independent Carbon Abatement Integrity Committee to advise the government on the integrity of ACCU methods, replacing the existing Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee. The new committee will bring enhanced independence and expertise, broader functions and stronger transparency obligations. These changes will better position the committee to carry out its essential role of ensuring all ACCU methods meet the legislated offsets integrity standards. The committee will continue to provide the government with expert advice on priorities for the proponent-led method development process, recognising that effective prioritisation is essential to a forward supply of ACCUs and the ongoing refinement and integrity of methods. Importantly, the new committee will be required to include at least one Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander member so that First Nations knowledge and perspectives are embedded in its work and enshrining what is the current approach of the ERAC. The bill also transfers responsibility for any future government purchasing of ACCUs from the Clean Energy Regulator to the Secretary of the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water to achieve the clear separation of the responsibility for decisions to purchase ACCUs from the responsibility to regulate projects and ACCU issuances within the scheme, implementing a Chubb review recommendation in a way that also provides more flexibility in how the government may purchase ACCUs in future. What's more, the bill replaces the current requirement for government purchasing of ACCUs to secure least cost abatement with a new requirement to make value for money purchases. This principle ensures the government can consider other factors alongside abatement when making ACCU purchases, including the very considerable non-carbon benefits that arise from the scheme. Deputy Speaker, together, these changes will mean that any future purchasing of ACCUs by the government can be done in a way that supports its strategic priorities as they evolve over time. The bill also strengthens the compliance and regulatory framework that underpins the scheme. It introduces a new integrity safeguard, the Method Transition Declaration. In the very rare circumstances where this may be necessary, this mechanism will prevent ongoing crediting of ACCUs to projects using methods found to lack sufficient integrity. Let me be clear, this is not a tool for routine intervention. It's a circuit breaker designed to respond to exceptional circumstances where a serious issue in relation to an ACCU method presents a material risk to the integrity of the scheme as a whole. Appropriate criteria, conditions and controls are built into the design of this mechanism to make sure it is used only where an exceptional intervention is warranted, while requiring due consultation on and consideration of the impacts on projects. The bill also amends ACCU relinquishment provisions to complement existing mechanisms in the scheme that ensure the crediting of ACCUs is conservative. It provides a new voluntary pathway for project proponents to initiate relinquishment of ACCUs where they may have inadvertently provided incorrect information to the regulator, allowing proponents to voluntarily correct any ACCU issuance that has occurred by an administrative error. and it provides the regulator new powers to require relinquishment of ACCUs if new or updated information from proponents affects project abatement estimates and identifies overcrediting. The bill also enhances the regulator's compliance powers by clarifying their ability to review decisions later found to have been based on false or misleading information, and introduces a power for infringement notices to be issued for lower-level breaches. These provisions close identified gaps in scheme administration and demonstrate the government's commitment to continuous improvement over time. Maintaining a high-integrity scheme must go hand in hand with encouraging forward-looking participation and innovation. Carbon farming is a unique industry. It depends on a combination of land stewardship, science and long-term investment supported by clear and predictable rules. The bill recognises this by incorporating measures to simplify and streamline administration and reduce unnecessary regulatory burden. Deputy Speaker, the bill also aims to encourage more investment and participation in research and development on new emissions reduction technologies by removing existing barriers to new and varied methods that might otherwise make an effective contribution to the objectives of the scheme. This addresses concerns we've heard from industry that current newness requirements could lead to projects being excluded from the scheme due to previous participation in legitimate and valuable R&D. For that reason, this bill creates tailored newness requirements to ensure projects aren't excluded from the scheme due to earlier participation in R&D that has contributed to method development. In addition, the bill makes targeted amendments so that future methods could allow a single project to include both sequestration activities and separate emissions avoidance activities where that can occur consistent with the offset integrity standards. This change will enable landholders to have more flexibility and choice in future on the range of activities they may wish to undertake. The integrated farm and land management method is a great example. Currently under development, this method would also be the first to provide a framework for additional activities to be added over time. These amendments will mean those activities can include emission avoidance activities such as methane emission reduction from livestock alongside sequestration activities such as regenerating native forest. Deputy Speaker, these measures will support new projects and a broader range of participants coming into the scheme while maintaining the scheme's bedrock of integrity. This bill also supports the transparency and administration of the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme and implements the government's response to the Climate Change Authority's 2023 review of the scheme and its legislation. The ENGIS scheme is reporting greenhouse gas emissions, energy consumption and energy production by Australian businesses. It is a key source of data supporting Australia's international and domestic reporting obligations, underpinning the safeguard mechanism and informing our domestic climate and energy policies. This bill delivers greater transparency by introducing new flexible powers to require publication of more information submitted under the ENGIS scheme. It also closes gaps in the compliance framework by requiring continued reporting obligations in the case of delayed registration, and it improves scheme administration by allowing the regulator to deregister a corporation on its own initiative where the corporation is in liquidation and unlikely to further participate in the scheme. Finally, Deputy Speaker, this bill amends the New Vehicle Efficiency Standard Act 2024 to adjust the timing and alignment of key milestone dates. By changing the dates for the calculation of interim emissions values, final emissions values and the date to extinguish a liability, the bill provides certainty to industry by ensuring that legislative timelines allow them to adjust their vehicle mix to meet the NVES and therefore drive emissions reductions. Deputy Speaker, by updating and strengthening the ACCU scheme, this bill represents the next stage in the ongoing improvement and evolution of Australia's carbon market. Enacting these reforms will reinforce the fundamentally sound foundation of integrity that our market is built upon and at the same time provide the certainty it needs to drive more investment in emissions reductions across the nation. As Australia moves towards net zero emissions, demand for high-integrity ACCUs is expected to grow, and this bill makes sure the scheme can continue to meet that demand on a diversified basis with confidence and integrity.
Thank you. The debate must now be adjourned, and I call the member for Nichols.
I move the debate be adjourned.
The question is that the resumption of this debate be made an order of the day for the next sitting. All of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I believe the ayes have it. I call the clerk.
Government business. Notice number 4. Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, upgrade and fit out of Building 302, Research Way, Clayton, Victoria.
I call the Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move that in accordance with the provisions of the Public Works Committee Act 1969, it is expedient to carry out the following proposed work, which was referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Public Works and on which the committee has duly reported to Parliament. Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, upgrade and fit out of Building 302, Research Way, Clayton, Victoria. The Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation seeks parliamentary approval to upgrade and fit out Building 302 at the organisation's Clayton site in Melbourne, which will provide purpose-built laboratory facilities for research staff relocating from the organisation's site in the Melbourne suburb of Aspendale. The estimated project cost is $18.27 million, excluding GST. The proposed works were referred to the Public Works Committee on the 30th of March 2026. Following its inquiry, the committee recommended that the House of Representatives resolve that it is expedient to carry out the proposed works. Subject to parliamentary approval, the works are expected to commence in late 2026 and be completed by August 2027. On behalf of the government, I'd like to thank the committee, ably chaired by the member for Macon, for undertaking a timely inquiry. I commend the motion to the House.
Thank you. I put the question that the motion be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I believe the ayes have it, and I call the clerk.
Government business. Notice number 5. Australian Federal Police, proposed fit out of leased premises, 949 Ann Street, Brisbane.
I call the Minister.
I move that in accordance with the provisions of the Public Works Committee Act 1969, it is expedient to carry out the following proposed work, which was referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Public Works and on which the committee has duly reported to Parliament. Australian Federal Police, proposed fit out of leased premises, 949 Ann Street, Brisbane. The Australian Federal Police seeks parliamentary approval to fit out a new purpose-built facility which the AFP will lease from July 2029. The facility is located at 949 Ann Street, Brisbane, and will allow for the consolidation of AFP operations from its 2 existing premises at 45 Commercial Road, Newstead, and 180 Alfred Street, Fortitude Valley. The estimated total cost of the works is $89.3 million, excluding GST. The proposed works were referred to the Public Works Committee on the 23rd of March 2026. Following its inquiry, the committee recommended that the House of Representatives resolve that it is expedient to carry out the proposed works. Subject to parliamentary approval, construction is expected to commence in mid-October 2027 for practical completion by July 2029. On behalf of the government, I'd like to thank the committee, ably chaired by the member for Macon, for undertaking a timely inquiry. I commend the motion to the House.
Thank you. I put the question that the motion be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I believe the ayes have it. I have to report that the Federation Chamber has been unable to complete its consideration of the Counter-Terrorism Legislation Amendment Bill 2026 and has returned the bill to the House with an unresolved question. I present a certified copy of the bill together with a schedule of the question, which the Federation Chamber was unable to resolve. I understand it is the wish of the House to consider the bill immediately. The unresolved question is that the amendments moved by the member for Mayo be agreed to. The question is that those amendments be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. I believe the noes have it. Okay, division required. bells are ringing for 4 minutes.
Lock the doors. The question is the amendments moved by the honourable member for Mayo be agreed to. The ayes will pass the right of the chair and the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Capricornia and Monash as tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Werriwa and Bean as tellers for the noes. I could just ask the members for Curtin, Wentworth and McKellar to please take a seat.
Sheet changes it. It specifically and deliberately removes from the Minister the power to make conditions in relation to industrial relations conditions. You can only imagine how the NTEU dropped their bundle at the prospect of a future minister having control over their industrial conditions, and no doubt they told the minister to fix it. You can imagine the flurry of activity that followed. Because let's be clear here, I finished talking about this bill around 12:45 p.m. on the 2nd of July. These amendments were ready to go before the very next sitting day. Helpfully, the government amendments have a timestamp. They were finalised on August 10, 2026 at 3:13 p.m. and 4 seconds. 10 days ago, on Monday of last week, before this Parliament had even returned for this sitting block, these amendments were ready to go. And if you work back from there, the process required to amend the bill, there's a long tail. You need to identify the problem, as I did on the 2nd of July. You need to give drafting instructions. You need to get the amendments through your internal processes, through Cabinet, and at least obtain the agreement of the Prime Minister. Presumably, you need to explain to caucus the stuff up. This is a fix that, I hazard a guess, has actually been weeks in the making. No wonder the Minister had to tell the Financial Review Conference he was open to amendments. No wonder he had to try and describe this as Hansen-proofing the bill. He's already had his marching orders from the NTEU and needed to try and make a virtue out of necessity. And so I've got some questions for the Minister. What does item 17 on this sheet do? Why have you introduced it? When did you give drafting instructions? Did you consult with the NTEU or other unions first? And why didn't you consult across the Parliament before circulating it?
Thank you. The question is that the amendments be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. Was that?
Call again. Too late?
Clerk? Member for Barra.
House. I want to say something about the process that's been followed through you, Deputy Speaker, and I'm now talking to members of the Parliament more broadly, particularly to the Labor caucus, to university administrators, to the leaders of Universities Australia and to the various university groups, to higher education specialists and journalists and this nation's major mastheads. As I said, the bill doesn't do what the Minister says it does, and the reason we're voting on these amendments now, before the bill has even been considered by a Senate committee, is because it's been obvious that the bill does something different. We're not prepared to wave these amendments through on less than 24 hours' notice. We will work through things sensibly. We want the record to show we're not simply prepared to give a blank cheque. As I pointed out, these amendments have been ready to go for 10 days. Even though the bill has been in the works since May 2025, it's apparent that the legislation introduced into this chamber contains errors and unintended consequences that weren't revealed until we pointed them out. As I pointed out some of these issues when I spoke on the bill on the 2nd of July, and there were government amendments ready to go before the very next sitting day. Let me look at how some of the other provisions on this sheet, other than item 17, operate. The government is now removing and replacing subsection 30.15.1 of its bill. As it was introduced, this provision said that the ATEC may, in writing, allocate a specified whole number of Commonwealth-supported places to a Table A provider or another higher education provider. It's a fundamental provision of this bill. It's about allocation of Commonwealth-supported places by the ATEC and how that is done. They are repealing the provision that they introduced a few weeks ago and replacing it. That sounds significant. So I asked the Minister, what exactly is changing here? The new provision says the ATEC must allocate Commonwealth-supported places to a Table A provider, which for those who are not familiar means a public university. It must allocate those places. It doesn't have a choice. And then there's a new provision, subsection 1A, which says ATEC may allocate places to another higher education provider. So my question to the Minister is, why are we having this change? Can he, through you, Deputy Speaker, explain item 3 on the government's amendments sheet, why it was deemed necessary? What is the unintended consequence that the government is trying to address before this bill even gets to the Senate? What has spooked them? Because the point I make is this: these aren't mere technical changes. This is one of the central provisions of the bill that is being changed. The provision of the bill that deals with the allocation of CSPs. As I said previously, the bill only really deals with 4 things: allocation of domestic student load, allocation of international student load, ministerial control and needs-based funding. The provision you are changing here is one of the key provisions that deals with domestic students, arguably the most important of those 4 areas. So why the urgent unannounced change? Is the Minister concerned the legislation as introduced would have allowed the ATEC not to give places to the public universities at all? Did the government discover the original bill didn't actually guarantee every Table A university an allocation? Was there a legal possibility that ATEC could choose not to allocate places to a particular public university at all? Could ATEC have allocated a Table A university fewer places than its calculated core student load? Could it have allocated none? The government should tell the House whether this amendment creates a statutory entitlement for every Table A provider to receive an allocation every year, and what is precisely the content of that entitlement. Is the guarantee simply that the number must be greater than 0, or does the interaction with the core student load provisions mean that every Table A provider is guaranteed its statutory core student load? This is the very drafting issue the higher education expert Professor Andrew Norton identified shortly after introduction. If the policy was domestic student profile would be the core student load plus growth, why did the bill merely say that it must not exceed that amount? The government is now addressing that issue, so was the original bill wrong? What would have happened if Parliament had passed the bill in its original form? And then there's the other side of the amendment, the non-Table A providers, the private higher education providers. Is there any minimum allocation for non-Table A providers? Which non-Table A providers will be eligible for these places? And what is the process for them to obtain places? Is there any right to reasons? Is there any transparent, competitive process? Is there a review mechanism if ATEC refuses an allocation? These are the core provisions of this bill. They go to how university places are allocated in this country. For students, it means this: rushed amendments to go where and whether you will. It means this: rushed amendments go to where and whether you will have the opportunity to study. My point to those listening is this: if within days of introduction you're having to make changes to the fundamental provisions of the bill, what else has the government missed?
Thank you. The question is that the amendments be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no? No. Okay, I think the ayes have it. All right, is a division required? Ring the bells for 4 minutes, please.
Lock the doors. The question is the amendments moved by the government be agreed to. The ayes will pass the right of the chair and the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Werriwa and Bean as tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Capricornia and Monash as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 90, noes 36. The matter is resolved in the affirmative. Before members move, I'd like to give a short statement to the House. There are new locking mechanisms in the doors, and they are closing slower than normal automatically. If members are approaching, this is just for information for members, if members are approaching the doors and they have begun to close, I've given the instruction that the doors are to be locked. If a member is approaching any of the chambers, any of the doors here, and they were to approach them and the doors are closing, do not enter in them. It doesn't mean you can slip in or get in there. It's just that to assist with members entering and exiting the chamber, I have ensured that the doors are on a slower mechanism to help members entering and leaving the chamber. So just moving forward, this is a new shift for the Parliament. If a door is closing, that is not to be entered into. I thank members. Okay. Now, we shall move to the next amendments and give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
1 to 3 as circulated in my name together.
Is leave granted? The Minister? I thank the Minister. The member may proceed.
I move amendments 1 to 3 as circulated in my name together. Now, these amendments in relation to the Universities Accord Bill is to ensure that we find the right balance. I support the ambition of the Universities Accord to expand access to higher education and ensure more Australians have the opportunity to attend university. But this bill needs stronger safeguards in two important areas: protecting university autonomy and properly supporting outreach to students who are currently missing out. Now, I acknowledge in the amendments the government just introduced and which I supported, there were some measures to start to clarify that question. For example, stopping the minister from using opaque university-specific grant conditions to control courses or industrial relations and requiring those conditions to be made public. These are all important in assisting university autonomy, which goes towards, in some way, to my amendments. Again, I would like to point out it would have been nice to have the opportunity for more clarity and discussion with the Minister in relation to the amendments that I am proposed and the government's amendments, but that was not forthcoming. My first amendment explicitly, though, prevents allocations being imposed at the level of individual courses, fields of education or classes of courses. Under this bill, the government determines the overall number of international student places and the Australian Tertiary Education Commission allocates places between institutions. Whatever members think of that broader framework, there should be a clear limit on how far government interference can go. Once a university receives its allocation, it should be for that university to decide how these places are distributed across its courses. Canberra should not be deciding whether a university can enrol more international students in engineering, nursing and business than humanities or any other disciplines. Those are decisions for universities based on student demand, workforce needs, research strength and the communities they serve. We have already seen through the Job Ready Graduate Scheme the problems that arise when governments try to pick and choose which fields of study students should pursue. We should not create another mechanism that allows a minister or government agency to micromanage academic offerings. My amendment therefore draws a clear line. Allocations may be made at the institutional level, but not at the course level. That is an important protection for university autonomy. The second amendment addresses another fundamental objective of the Accord, widening participation in higher education. If we want more students from disadvantaged backgrounds to attend university, support cannot begin only after they enrol. For many students, the barriers arise much earlier. They may be the first person in their family to consider university. They may live
Honourable members, the Speaker. I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples who are the traditional custodians of the Canberra area and pay respects to the elders past and present of all Australia's Indigenous peoples. Almighty God, we humbly beseech thee to vouchsafe thy blessing upon this Parliament. Direct and prosper our deliberations to the advancement of thy glory and the true welfare of the people of Australia. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen. I present a schedule showing the allocation to committees of annual reports of government departments and agencies. A copy of the schedule will be incorporated in Hansard. Give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move that so much of the standing and cessational orders be suspended as would prevent the member for Warringah from moving the following motion immediately. That the House 1 notes that A, femicide, family and domestic violence and sexual violence are at crisis point in Australia. B, that Australian Femicide Watch records 45 women and 19 children killed by violence this year. C, the 27-year-old Brisbane woman killed on 12 August had reportedly sought police assistance days earlier and had a temporary domestic violence order in place. That D, the New South Wales Law Enforcement and Conduct Commission, in its June 16 report in New South Wales, found the police response to the fatal assault of Lindy Lucina inadequate, identified systemic failures and made 8 recommendations, but yet with no formal New South Wales police response yet published. E, 2 high-profile allegations of sexual assault matters are currently being investigated by police, and while due process and the presumption of innocence must be respected, these instances are not isolated and allegations must be taken seriously by all institutions in a way which prioritises victim safety and well-being. F, research links disrespectful attitudes towards women and violence against women. G, Australian women feel angry about violence against women, institutional failures and a culture that leaves women and girls feeling and being unsafe. And H, governments have failed to implement a multitude of recommendations arising from numerous reviews and inquiries into domestic and family violence conducted in recent years. 2, calls on the government to acknowledge that violence against women remains a national crisis despite government efforts to date. And A, empower the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commissioner to compel information and more consistent public reporting and to examine the failures of governments to implement previous inquiry recommendations. Or B, establish a Royal Commission into femicide and domestic and family violence to examine, amongst other matters, where police, courts and services have adequate powers, systems and information sharing arrangements. And 3, further calls on the government to establish a national domestic violence offender register, including appropriately safeguarded disclosure. B, work through National Cabinet to strengthen bail, sentencing and protection order enforcement, improve monitoring of high-risk offenders and properly fund frontline services and safe housing. And C, affirm that responses to sexual violence and allegations must use accurate language, avoid minimisation and centre the safety, dignity and well-being of alleged victims, not institutional reputations or sporting prospects. We are at a crisis point, Mr Speaker, and I urge the government to take note of and to allow debate on this very serious issue. I move that standing orders be suspended because this is something the House should confront. It is a national crisis, that violence against women and girls and the repeated failures of institutions to keep them safe. By suspending standing orders to have this debate, I acknowledge it's an exceptional step, but these are exceptional circumstances. Australian Femicide Watch records 45 women and 19 children killed by violence already this year. These numbers are not an abstraction. Each represents a person, a family and a community shattered. And this has been a deeply disturbing week for Australian women. As I mentioned, as it is set out in the motion, another young woman, 27-year-old Brisbane woman, was killed last week. And whilst this matter is still under investigation and criminal allegations need to be determined and the legal process followed, and we should not be prejudging, but we can't ignore some of the reported circumstances, being that this young woman had reportedly sought help from police only days earlier and a temporary domestic violence order was in place. This compels urgent questions again and again as to why is it that then this is still not keeping women safe. Why police, courts and services knew? What did they know? What if are risks being escalated? Is it being identified appropriately? What protective actions was taken or could have been taken? How are we going to act to address these systems' failure? Because ultimately, women and children are still not safe in Australia. Of course, this week we've also been rocked by high-profile, serious allegations of sexual assault involving both private schoolboys, so at one end of the spectrum, very young men, and then professional AFL players. Again, those involved can't be treated as guilty before legal processes are complete. But what has been concerning has been the response from powerful institutions. Again, when serious allegations of sexual violence emerge, these issues need to be raised. They're important. The first instinct should not be to minimise or distance institutions from allegations or manage reputational fallout. Serious allegations should be described accurately. They should not be softened into euphemisms, treated as public relations inconveniences, or reframed about consequences for the institutions or the persons. It's really important that respect for women start in how institutions respond to these events. Of course, we must make sure also that the victims, the alleged victims at the centre of allegations, are at the centre of the response. This motion calls on the government to act with urgency on so many issues that remain outstanding. Too many inquiries have urgent recommendations that have not been actioned, and there is no real rational explanation as to why that has not occurred to date. Much work must be done in this space by the government. Including establish things like a DV offender register and for national actions. We need to get to a process of elevating this issue to ensure women and girls are safe. These numbers are unacceptable, and I urge the House to consider this in relation to the motion, because women are tired. They are tired of facing these on a weekly basis, these crises and these allegations. They're tired of seeing institutions fail to respond with the adequate seriousness, and so I urge the government to consider this.
Is the motion seconded?
The motion is seconded. Okay, thank you. Women in my community and around the country are despairing this week. This week, we learned that 3 boys from Scots College, aged just 13 and 14, have been charged with aggravated sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl. A devastating report, every parent's worst nightmare. And this week, several players from Sydney Swans have been linked to an alleged sexual assault. The Swans are one of Wentworth's favourite teams. As Brooke Boney put it today, these allegations are especially painful for so many women because sexual violence is not an abstract issue. We have experienced it ourselves or watched people we love experience it. In Australia, 1 in 5 women has experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. 1 in 5. Our schools, our favourite sporting teams. These headlines haven't exposed a new crisis. Australian Femicide Watch has counted 45 women killed this year alone. This is not only a national issue, but at a personal level, it's a very local one. Some people think that domestic and sexual violence doesn't happen in the eastern suburbs in a more privileged area of the country. They are wrong. Local police tell me that over 50% of their time is spent on domestic violence and family violence matters. Everyone in our community knows someone who's experienced it, and women come into my office and send me emails to stop me on the street to talk about what has happened and how to prevent this. Now, we cannot minimise this issue. Women are at the centre of the headlines and the stories that we know. These allegations must be taken seriously, and we must centre on those stories. We cannot minimise those stories. We've got to stop the victim blaming. I want to acknowledge the government's work and the minister's work in this space, and I know that the minister takes this work and this issue incredibly seriously and personally. And I recognise that the government has done significant work for women since their time of office, and I think that should be commended. But I think we have to acknowledge that we continue to have a crisis here and that we have to go further and faster, and that is why we have stopped Parliament in this case because of this. Because we all know, despite our best efforts, despite all the goodwill, it is not changing at the way it needs to. There are limits on what any government can do, but we are not yet pushing those limits. We know that government not go into people's bedrooms, into their homes, cannot control the actions of individuals. But there is an onus on government to lead the way on reform, to act on the recommendations on people who have lived it, and for all of our institutions to help change the culture that enables this in this country. We have brought this to Parliament today because the matter is urgent and it is chronic, and because there are things government should do and could do right now. We know we need to do more on prevention. Factors like gambling, alcohol, financial abuse, access to childcare, all these factors have been raised with me, and I raised gambling because the government had a choice this week to go further to where people wanted it to go, and it chose not to, and that is not supporting women. Our digital environments are perpetuating this. The government needs to move quickly on its digital duty of care and, frankly, needs to move to fix our feeds so that the algorithms which are promoting sort of toxic masculinity can be stepped away from by those young people who want to. And let's be honest, we have this issue that we do not know how to deal with, that the greatest perpetrators of sexual violence against young women are boys, adolescent boys. We as a country do not know how to deal with this, but this issue has to be on the table if we are going to protect our young girls and our young boys. This crisis is evolving before us, and there have been enormous reviews and recommendations in this, and I respect people have spent hours of their lives contributing to the reviews that have been in the sector. But one of the most deepest frustration that I hear from the sector is that is the tracking of these reviews. It's the tracking of the recommendations and seeing if they're actually being implemented. As the Domestic Family Violence Commissioner Cronin has said, we have the political will across the governments, we have a national focus through National Cabinet. We now need a razor-sharp focus on coordinated, accountable and agile delivery. That is where we need to go. They have delivered, all these reports have delivered strikingly consistent recommendations and are calling for a move beyond the fragmented responses to family violence and domestic violence and sexual violence. But we have not got there yet. And we need that implementation tracking to see, so that we can actually see what is being done and what isn't being done. And finally, we need to support our frontline services more robustly. That is what we all know in this country is required.
Question is the motion be agreed to, and I'll give a call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and I'm very pleased to speak to this motion today, and I thank the member for Warringah for bringing it on. We've met most recently on the 12th of February to talk about family, domestic and sexual violence, and I thank her and the other crossbench members who are speaking about this for their continued engagement. Our government is absolutely committed to reducing rates of family, domestic and sexual violence and ending violence against women and children. Every single death is a tragedy. Every death is one too many. Just last week, we heard of another woman in Queensland killed allegedly by a former partner, and that the member refers to in this motion. This Parliament grieves every time we hear a tragic story like this with the loved ones of the woman killed. It's absolutely correct that the Commonwealth, as well as the states and territories, must be held to account for our progress on ending family, domestic and sexual violence in Australia. And we are resolute as a government on facing up to that accounting, making sure that we keep all Australians safe. We are focused on implementing the change we need, including by rolling out more than $4.4 billion worth of measures for frontline services, prevention programs, behaviour change, programs for children, right across government. And we're working right now on how we can expand on these efforts with the next action plan to end violence against women and their children. Just last week, the Prime Minister and I met with 14 organisations, national organisations, to discuss where we can make the most impact over the next 5 years of our second action plan. This is one of more than 160 roundtables our government has held in recent months with over 1,100 people. We've received 1,300 survey responses and 535 submissions from organisations about our next action plan. I want to thank every victim survivor, every frontline worker, every concerned Australian who has contributed to this process. This suspension motion deals with a number of topics, and I can't do justice to each of them in the short amount of time I have. So let me focus on just a few. The member has called for a Royal Commission, and I understand that this call comes from a very good place. It comes from the concerns that people have, the desire to see an end to family, domestic and sexual violence in this country. But, Mr Speaker, we don't need another report. As the members themselves have said, last year's Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commissioner's annual report to Parliament pointed out that we have 1,000 recommendations already from a variety of reports across 8 Royal Commissions, 8 major reports like Royal Commissions, inquiries and reviews to guide us. And Mr Speaker, I wanted to show the chamber, these are the recommendations. We don't need another Royal Commission. These are the recommendations of those reports alone. The South Australian Royal Commission took 17 months from its beginning to its end. I don't want to spend another 17 months examining the same issue that we've examined in 8 major reports recently. We need to get on and act, and that's what frontline workers, domestic violence survivors and experts have told us. Every family violence peak body in the country released a statement that says, and I quote, "Royal Commissions have an important role in the Australian system, including gathering evidence when we have no other way to get to the root of a problem. That is not the situation here. The evidence is clear. We know what needs to be done to prevent, respond to and help people heal from family violence. Ending this crisis requires action, and that's what I'm determined to do. It requires conversations at home and in our community, in workplaces. It requires legislative change. It requires our collective efforts at every level. And as a government, our investment has been heavily focused, and rightly so, on response and recovery for women victim survivors. About 80% of our $4.4 billion investment goes to response. So far, we've funded 1,400 organisations to help about 500,000 people, including through things like making the Leaving Violence payment permanent, an extra $500 million to fund 500 new frontline workers, and $1.2 billion invested in crisis housing so that women and children can safely leave domestic violence. But I have to say, Mr Speaker, this investment in frontline services will never decline until we deal with the root of the problem, and that is stopping the violence before it happens. And I'd also say, Mr Speaker, that when we see state governments and territory governments actually cut their investment in the face of this violence, it's incredibly disappointing. Unbelievably, Queensland, where we've seen this most recent tragic death, has cut $40 million from domestic and family violence services and hidden a report that made 350 important recommendations. And in this morning's Courier Mail, we read that domestic violence services that have criticised these cuts have been threatened with further funding cuts and hauled into the Minister's office. The same case has occurred in the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory has shocking rates of family, domestic and sexual violence, shocking rates, and we've seen horrific murders there recently. They have cut their funding by 11%, more than a tenth of their budget they have cut in recent times. The dollars matter. The dollars matter, and we will continue to invest, and we expect states that are responsible for delivering important frontline services, we expect them to continue to invest as well. But as the member for Wentworth said, we are fighting a losing battle unless we directly address the online misogyny that is driving so much of this behaviour. And we've seen a couple of recent reports that are very disturbing, as the motion refers to, but I would say this. Organisations like schools, like sporting clubs, provide the real-world role models and heroes that our young men look up to. When they're being fed a diet of violent pornography before they've had their first kiss, it is no surprise that we are seeing rates of sexual assault exploding amongst under 18s. The best antidote to that is the work that we're doing as a government to limit the exposure of young people to violent misogyny online. But real-world role models have the power to change this, and they come through our families sitting at the dining table, they come through our sporting clubs, and of course they come through our schools as well. Mr Speaker, the issue of family, domestic and sexual violence will soon return to the National Cabinet. The Prime Minister has said that he wants to go back to the National Cabinet with issues around family, domestic and sexual violence, because we are absolutely, as a Commonwealth Government, prepared to play a leadership role, to invest, to drive change, to make legislative reform, but we need the partnership of the states and territories as well, Mr Speaker. So far, in recent times, as I say, we've invested more than any other government. We've made the leaving violence payment permanent. We've launched the first ever standalone plan for family, domestic and sexual violence for First Nations women, backed by an additional $218 million investment. We've boosted funding for that 500 workers program by more than 70%. We've boosted funding for 1800 Respect by 40%. We've invested $183 million to make the child support system safer. We've legislated to make sure our social security system can't be weaponised by perpetrators of abuse. We've funded programs that intervene earlier with men who want to change their behaviours. We've invested in emergency and transitional accommodation